welcome everyone to another edition of Seeing Jazz. Today we are speaking with Andrea Canter from Minneapolis. She's a jazz photographer. I'm Hrayr Attarian. I'm a member of the Jazz Journalists Association and amateur photographer myself. Since we have a small group, we thought maybe we can do this more interactive from the audience. Like I can, after a brief self-introduction with Andrea, I can pull up photos and people can just discuss, ask questions instead of me being the primary leader of the discussion. Andrea, can you please give us a very brief intro about how you got into photography and jazz photography or music photography in general?
Well, my parents gave me a Kodak Brownie Star Flash for my 8th birthday. We're talking about the late 50s. So I started out in photography very early, not photographing music, of course. And I continue to be interested in photography all my life. But I spent most of my life in the Minneapolis schools as a psychologist and did take some courses in community art centers in photography, but didn't really get into the music photography. And Windows wants to install an update, tell it to go away. Always happens in the middle of something. When I retired in 2004, it was about the same time that a friend of mine started the Jazz Police website. And I hadn't really been doing any music photography up to that point until I got my first digital, which was a few months before that. I didn't see any way of taking photographs in indoor places anyway without a flash. So when Jazz Police started, I started out writing reviews for him and started taking my first digital camera into jazz clubs and using that to illustrate what I was writing. And as I got more and more into that, I found more and more ways to expand what I was doing. I started taking photographs at the Twin Cities Jazz Festival, and over the years became they didn't have a real photographer. I sort of did it for fun. And over the years, I became their staff photographer, which I just retired from doing last year after doing it for about 12, 13 years. And friends of mine who were from Detroit, we started going to the Detroit Jazz Festival in about 2008, I think. And I started getting into the press group that did photography at the Detroit Jazz Festival. And it just kind of grew. I did more and more here in the Twin Cities. I went to more jazz festivals. And in, I think, 2011, I got my first chance to publish in Downbeat and became part of that group that for at least the next 10 years got a note. Every time they wanted photos, I was one of the people who would send them in, and probably had 50, 60 published over the next 10 years. Here, I've done a limited amount of photography of bands when they want, press photography, photography for their CD covers, things like that. So I've never done it to make a living. I can't even imagine doing it to make a living, but it's contributed to my retirement income anyway. I've started doing less and less because I'm getting older and older, and it's getting harder and harder to carry all that gear around. I haven't been to Detroit, and I think since before COVID. I still do photography here locally with our local musicians, and also the Iowa City Jazz Festival I cover too. So most of my work has been either on Jazz Police or Downbeat, a few newspapers. So that's kind of my general photography trajectory.
Thank you for that.
Will you talk a little bit more about the Jazz Police? Just tell us who.
Oh, yeah. Don Berryman was the founder and long-term editor of Jazz Police. It was an online magazine. It still exists. That originally started out just being local. We got some more people involved and would start covering other things. So it ended up being promos for jazz events here. There's me and Don at the beginning of our career in 2004, the Jazz Police. CD reviews, gig reviews, especially covering jazz festivals. The problem with Jazz Police is we never had much of a staff. It was me and Don, and occasionally someone else would write something. We found a couple out on the East Coast who started covering the East Coast jazz festivals. Don retired from that in, I think, 2014 or 2015, and a local musician and tech guy, Steve Kenny, took it over then. And so it's continued. But we've lost some of the people that regularly wrote for us because they've moved or just stopped. So I don't write for them as much myself either, because I've gotten more into visual art and less into covering the jazz scene as I did, 7 or 8 years ago. So it still exists, jazzpolice.com, and it's a collection of some promos for events here in the Twin Cities and reviews of jazz festivals, both here and on the East Coast, and occasional CD reviews. So it's still there. But that's what got me into jazz photography, really.
Is this a selfie?
No, I don't. I think Don's wife maybe took the picture. I don't know. Obviously I was not the photographer. I don't know who took the photo. It's the only one you're going to see that isn't one that I took. So, back in 2004, I have no recollection who took the photo.
Do you want to mention Pamela also? Do you want to mention Pamela Espelon?
Oh, Pamela was a fabulous jazz writer and promoter who covered the local scene in a lot of other publications, including the Twin Cities newspapers. Always went to Monterey, covered that. Died 2 years ago, I think, maybe 3 this fall, of a sudden stroke. And we lost probably one of the best jazz writers around. She published in other magazines and things. So I knew Pamela well, and she was always everywhere I was, or I was everywhere she was, maybe is more accurate.
Thank you.
I pulled up the photos you sent for from festivals, and maybe I can pull them up and open it up for audience discussion.
Sure.
All right, let me share my screen again.
I just pulled out a sampling of photos from festivals I've attended in the last 10 to 15 years, either because they're my favorites or because they show something. I've always found getting at a jazz festival, getting a good shot of the group to be very difficult. Photographers are kind of limited in terms of where we can stand and also for how long we can be there, depending on the festival. A lot of these are from Detroit, including this one of Schofield Lovano Quartet. But I thought this was one of my better ones because I actually had a clear view, which was sometimes a rare experience.
Yeah, you don't have the microphones in the way.
Right. I think I'm trying to, I think this, I'm trying to remember which stage this was at, and I haven't been to Detroit for a while, so they've probably changed them, but it's probably their big stage in the area, not the one out in the middle of downtown, but the one that's sort of in the middle of the festival complex, because I obviously am higher up than stage level, and I don't think there's any other place I could have gotten that angle.
When Howard mentioned mics aren't in the way, do you sometimes post-production clean up the mics, get rid of them?
I have been doing it recently. This long ago, I wasn't. This was probably from, I think, 2015.
Yeah.
I don't really like spending most of my time in the computer. I'd rather spend it out taking photos. What I used to do is if the microphones were just really heavily in the way, I just didn't use the photo or take the photo. If there's one microphone blocking somebody's face, I'm not real good at doing photo editing, so I would probably have trouble taking it out anyway. But in this photo, I don't really see any reason to take anything out. But a lot of times when I'm at a lower angle, they can be in the way, especially with a group situation at a festival. There's mics all over the place. In a club, it's much easier.
to my eye, the only reason that you'd want to remove anything here is that center mic becomes the center of the photo.
It does, and I think now I would probably go back and take that one out. And maybe I should, except that I'm not using that photo for anything, so, yeah.
Nice moment, though. It's a good moment.
Yeah, I loved, and I don't know if you can see it large enough. I love the expression on the drummer. I think that's Kobe Watkins, and he just had this, oh my God, I'm having a great time look on his face. And Joe and John sort of really looking at each other, and that's Ben Street on the bass, whittling away.
Nice.
I found big bands really always challenging to photograph because it's very hard to get an angle where you can get, the big band. And this is Maria Schneider, and this is also back in Detroit, probably 2014, 2015. And I, again, I believe, trying to remember where this was actually shot, which stage. I think it was the same stage. But I was high enough to get most of the band in that shot and get her in action. And I think it's Ryan Keberly, I think, on trombone there. Most of my shots of Maria Schneider are of her directing, not of the whole bands or most of the band. So this was kind of a special one for me to get.
Is it
And
back?
it looks like the.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Hrayr.
So this
Light.
was the lights. There were
Mhm.
it's
Right.
at nighttime, looks like, and the way the lights are shining off the brass is very interesting.
Yeah.
And off their faces.
Yeah, sometimes, well, a lot of the times those lights at jazz festivals in the evening ruin everything. Detroit's better than most. I just shot down at a jazz festival where the last set, the lights were so red and so saturated, and they kept changing the color. So it just totally drives you crazy. And then you end up, I end up using black and white probably because I can't get rid of that saturated red very well. Detroit, I don't think I ever had a real problem with the color of the lights. And a lot of it had to do with where I was able to stand so the lights weren't in my eyes. I could actually tell what I was shooting here.
How wide a lens are you using?
This was probably shot with a 24-105 because I only used two lenses, the 24-105 and a 70-200. And this was not shot with that one. I think I was probably sitting a few rows up, not into the area where the photographers are jammed in for 10 minutes. I think this was up later a little bit, so that I could get more of the band in the photo.
Yeah, I don't know about what type of 70-10 you have, but I find the 70-10 that came with my Nikon camera very unwieldy.
I love my 70. It's a 70-200 Canon. It's the f4, not the 2.8, which weighs 3 times as much, which is why I have the f4. And it's not unwieldy. I think it's I think it's a sharp.
So it doesn't zoom out, because the Nikon, the standard Nikon, I know, but physically the body gets so long.
Oh, it does get longer, but it doesn't get that long. It's more of a wider body.
Yeah. So the regular, the one that comes standard with the Nikon cameras, their base model, when you go to 210, it gets so long that it's very awkward.
People that have the 2.8 on that Canon lens love it also. But it didn't come with a camera. I don't have anything. I didn't buy a camera that came with a lens. You
want to talk a little bit more about your equipment?
Right now, I've shifted to the mirrorless, the R5, the Canon R5, which I think has just been upgraded to something else. But it was their flagship mirrorless back in 2020 when I bought it, and I really wanted it because it was a half-pound lighter than I've been using a 5D before that. I really like this camera. I wish it was another half-pound lighter now that I'm 4 years older. But I've always used Canon since the digitals came out, and So this is my favorite one. It's a nice sharp camera. It's and those are the two lenses I use. I have a 50 millimeter, and I have a 100 macro, which I will use, but not obviously in jazz photography. And I haven't used the 50 in years. So I'm not a gearhead. And I'm not a tech head either. So I basically
I mean, you don't have to. I mean, I paraphrase, but something like the French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson said that images aren't made in the camera; they're made in your head.
right.
So it doesn't matter the equipment you have.
But some lenses will take better, or do more better.
Yes,
than others,
obviously,
of course,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
right, yeah, you've got to have, I guess, a basic set of things that really work well,
Yeah.
and it's up to you.
I like that you've got the audience and even the structure in that photo. You know, the little, I think that really adds to it.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm sure I was up a little higher than the ground level, because I was able to get what was behind that stage. At Detroit, they have, I think on that main stage, there's audience going all the way around. At the higher level, it's almost like a balcony.
And it seems to me that your that composition element is very important for your photographs. So you tend to compose them well.
Compose them as well as I can, and then crop them to make it look better when I get home. So,
okay.
So yeah, I'm not afraid to crop.
I love the light. It looks like a drawing.
It does, yeah, it does.
Francisco, this is actually one of the newest photos in this bunch. This is from the Twin Cities Jazz Festival that was just a month ago. Shooting from behind the stage, because the drummers, drummers often buried in microphones and maybe other musicians. And some places, if I can get behind the stage, I have a much better view of the drummer. And sometimes the lighting is actually a lot better too, which it was in this case. So this is just shot a month ago.
Yeah, it's looking at a lot of jazz photographs we get, especially for the annual contest. I've always see drummers whose faces are covered by the cymbal.
Oh yeah.
So I think this is really great that the cymbal is right in front of him, but you can see his full face.
Yeah. Well, and he's one of my favorite drummers to photograph, because he's photogenic, and he's always got great expressions, and the way he moves physically, he's just always been one of my favorites.
And I love the sharpness of your photographs. How do you manage that?
Using a really good lens and shooting in as high a speed as I can.
Speed. Okay.
Yeah. I mean that, because I'm not personally a human tripod, so I like to shoot faster, and if I have to kick up the ISO, that's one of the reasons I really love the newer cameras, is you can drive that ISO up pretty high and still stay sharp.
And what about another photographer 6-7 months ago we had here said that his approach was to lower the aperture as low as possible, but I feel like that will sacrifice your depth of field.
And I vary my aperture probably more than anything else when I'm shooting, especially at an event that's live and active like a festival. I'll say I'll figure out what my lowest shutter speed is that I want to use, and just vary the aperture depending on what I'm shooting at. With that photograph of Francisco, I suspect that the probably a medium aperture on that, because there's really nothing behind him that I'm getting in there.
Yeah. So like a 4.5.
Or more. Yeah. I mean, or smaller. Yeah. Well, it can't be lower than 4, because that lens doesn't go lower than 4.
So, okay.
So I know it was at least 4. This is back about 10, 12 years ago. I went out a few times to the Healdsburg Jazz Festival in California, because my brother lives out there. And I actually went to a workshop that Sheila Jordan did, and then saw her perform with I'm gonna blank out his name.
Cameron Brown.
Thank you. Yeah. So the bassist she always plays with, and was able to get fairly close. This was outdoors, an outdoor stage, and I was able to be fairly close with a longer lens, and just love the expressions on both their faces on this one. I wish the music stand was just a few inches away so I got his fingertips, but so I didn't. But I like that. Iowa City Jazz Festival, Edmark, Castaneza, I think.
Castaneda.
Yeah. And again, I was able to be fairly close to the stage on that with a longer lens. And this is cropped some, not a lot, but just to really pull in his face and hand more. And I find small ensembles kind of difficult to do at festivals because there's often too many things in the way, especially microphones. This was not too much junk on the stage with the Not Cohen. I think this was the Iowa City Jazz Festival, which I go to every year because that's where I'm from. So I always do the festival for them.
When you say festival, do you have what kind of plan do you have when you go to a festival? Do you map out who you're going to see, or?
Yeah, it varies. Like the Iowa City Jazz Festival is the easiest festival in the world because there's only one thing happening at a time. They have one main stage, and in between the main stage acts, they have a side stage half a block away. So I don't have to manage a schedule the way I would at Detroit or at the Twin Cities, where there's multiple things happening all the time. When I was the only person shooting the Twin Cities Jazz Festival, I would talk to the directors and say, what are the most important things to you? And I would make sure I got the main stage shots, but in between the main stage events, there were so many options of where to go. And as I got older and didn't want to drag things around so much, I would mostly go to what was closest. And we had 2 photographers this year, which made a big difference because I could just stay at the main stage and he could go all over the place. In Detroit, I don't know if they still do it this way, but it used to be they had the pool of photographers who had been pre-approved, and you would go in for 10 minutes, all 15 or 20 of you, which was kind of a mess. But
do you get any backstage access?
I didn't seek a backstage pass. I think if I'd started doing all this when I was a lot younger, I would have done it a lot differently. But as a retirement career, there were certain things I'm going, I'm not worried about doing all that.
Yeah.
And or nobody's paying me to do that. So I would, in Detroit, it was the most complicated because all the times overlapped and the stages weren't always all that close together. So I'd say these are the 7 or 8 things I really want to see this weekend. And after shooting for a while, I go, what's nearby, and go and do that. Or wait till the rain stopped, which happened all the time in Detroit. So yeah, you have to map. If there's multiple things happening, I think you have to map it out ahead of time. Otherwise, it'd be chaos. And depending on what's going on, you might change your mind. But I think you do need a plan. So I always had a plan. I didn't always stick with it. And sometimes, like at the Twin Cities Festival, they would, or the Iowa City Festival, they'd say, "Hey, X is going on. We need some shots of that. Would you go get them?" So that'd be. I've always found it challenging to get the band and the crowd at the same time because you're usually not shooting at the right angle to do that. In Iowa City, before they moved the main stage, you were easily able to get behind the stage and shoot out toward the street with the crowd. So this is, I think, one of the better ones I did that included a crowd. Joshua Redman and the late Ron Miles over there on trumpet.
Brian Blade and Scott Colley on bass.
Yes.
I love this. I think this is a really great shot. Go back to it for a moment, please.
And they Iowa City Festivals use that shot for various things.
Yeah, it should.
It should, but now they've changed the staging. This used to be, I don't know if you know Iowa City at all, but the university campus was right in the middle of town, and an area called the Pentecrest, and the first Iowa Capitol building is the main administration building, and in front of that's where they always had the main stage. And you could climb steps on the Capitol building to shoot behind this without having to actually be on the stage and get the crowd. But they've moved, after a little hassle with the university, I think, they've moved their main stage to the street at that intersection. So you don't have the angles I used to have. You can't get high enough. And the crowd actually is more spread out now, because if they want shade, they're still on the university lawn instead of down the street. So this may not be a shot that I can ever get anything like that again there.
But it gives the whole festival feel better than most.
Yeah, I
That's
really like that angle, and I do miss it. So the close-up of Gerald Clayton at, I believe this was at either Iowa City or Detroit. I can't remember now looking at it.
It says Iowa City 2015.
Okay. I did label them so that I didn't have to remember.
Yeah.
And that's Charles Lloyd in the background there. But I just love the action on Gerald, and plus his crazy hair at that time. And so I will switch to black and white, usually because the lighting is telling me that you're going to spend days color correcting it if you don't switch to black and white. Or something about the light, the shadows of the light. Otherwise, I pretty much stay in color, but I do have a number that I've switched to black and white because I like them better that way. This is in the new stage at Iowa City, and if you get on the stage and at the right angle, you can catch some of the crowd, but this depends how the stage is set, whether you even dare get on it or not, or whether they let you on it or not. This is Corey Wong a couple years ago in Iowa City. Benny Green about 10 years ago in Detroit. And I've always loved shooting Benny because he's so expressive when he plays. And I think he was playing in the small outdoor stage in Detroit here, looking at the background, which was my favorite place to shoot in Detroit because they didn't regulate the photography there because it didn't seem to draw that many of the big journal output photographers. So you could sit there longer than 10 minutes, and it's an amphitheater, so you could get up higher or get down lower and get different angles.
I wonder what makes them decide who plays this versus the main stage.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Because you would think Benny Green, and you've notated that this is with the Warren Wolf Quartet.
Right, yeah, it wasn't.
It's a big enough name.
Yeah. Well, probably because Herbie Hancock was playing down the street. I don't know.
Oh, I see.
I mean, Detroit gets such big names for their big stages. Might have to do with cost. It might have to do with how big a crowd they expect to draw. I know even in the Twin Cities, we only have one designated main stage, really small ones, and the musicians are always complaining, and I'm sure they do at every festival. Well, I don't know why they didn't get me on the main stage. You know, I'm as good as so-and-so, or I'm as well known.
Yeah.
They like to rotate it around too. And it might depend on who's sponsoring it. If the only way to get somebody on the big stage is to have a corporate sponsor. And the corporate sponsors may dictate to some extent who they'll pay for. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it here in Chicago.
Well, that's a giant.
How they decide who plays where?
Yeah.
That's done mostly by the Jazz Institute's festival committee in collaboration with people from the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. And
because it's free in Chicago, so
it's
not a question about selling tickets.
Yeah. It's free in Detroit, and it's free in Iowa City, and it's free in the Twin Cities. So these are all free.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I think in Chicago, it used to be that the committee, the Jazz Institutes Committee, had a little bit more thumb on the scale. The last couple of years, they've tried to introduce other presenters into the committee who have something to say about it too. And also the guy who works on it from the city's point of view is Ramsey Lewis's son, Frayne Lewis. So he's had some opinions that help determine who goes on the main stage. Mike Reed is the leader of the Jazz Institutes Committee. Mike Reed, the drummer, and also he's involved in the Pitchfork Festival, and he owns a couple venues in Chicago. So he's very well connected and has helped to steer the curate, I should say, the themes of the festival.
Yeah, the Twin Cities has a big committee that makes a lot of those decisions, but I still think a lot has to do with the funding they're getting. And maybe to some extent, it also has to do with the musicians themselves. They may, well, we'd like to play your festival, but only if we can be on X stage.
Yeah,
That could
makes
happen.
sense.
Andrea, is there certain kinds of music or musicians that you prefer to listen to? So you go shoot them, or you go to shoot?
I mean, obviously I love listening to jazz, and that's why I got into jazz photography, but I grew up with classical music. I'd love to do more photography of classical musicians, but they're not in situations where you're allowed to do that usually, unless you can get yourself into a rehearsal situation. Or what's happening around here and maybe elsewhere is we're seeing more, particularly chamber classical groups performing in non-traditional settings like bars and small clubs, where it actually is more possible to do some photography.
Yeah.
But those
here, the only place is the University of Chicago has a series that mixes jazz, world, and classical music. It's usually, and the classical music is also very niche, like Renaissance music, or and in those settings you can photograph. Yeah, here at the symphony, they won't let you take pictures either.
Yeah. The other, and I think I have a few photos in there. The other, I got involved with a lot of young jazz musicians because I was on the board of an organization that supported youth jazz. And I did a lot of the photography of the bands and events that they had. And I haven't done as much of that since I've been off that board, but I've always enjoyed hearing young musicians, but also photographing young musicians. Country, I don't get into much. Rock, I don't get into much. Somebody else.
Even at a jazz festival where there's a lot of variety.
When I have options, I like most modern, a lot of more what's called modern jazz and avant-garde jazz up to a point. I like watching it better than just listening to it. There's been some musicians, I've gone to their events and found that I liked it much better than when I heard the music without sight. Part of it's because it's fun to see what they're really doing to make that sound, or the interactions between the musicians. So I'm not saying I turn the sound off, but I don't enjoy just some of that with just the sound. I like it both ways. You know, I want to see it too. Trying to remember the avant-garde saxophonist in New York that I wasn't going to go hear him because I heard his music and go, oh my God, it's just noise to me. And Jim Igo talked me into going. He says, no, go hear him. He's at the Iridium, blah, blah, blah. And I went, and watching it, I said, that was just fascinating. All these different trombones and all these different handmade instruments. And anyway, so sometimes watching it makes it much more sensible to me what I hear.
Well, this photo of Billy Hart makes his drumming more sensible in a way.
That one was actually in Downbeat. That was I think the only time I had a photo that spread across 2 pages. And I think that was from Detroit. I don't remember for sure.
Yeah, it says Detroit 2013.
Okay, and I don't remember now whether it was his own band or yeah, it was a while back. I don't remember, but I've done other photos of Billy over the years. He's been one of my favorite to photograph. I just find his expressions are so fun to capture. He just loves those drums, and so I've seen him a number of times over the years. Never in the Twin Cities, I don't think. I don't know why he hasn't ever been here, but anyway. And Dee Dee's always fun because she's got so many wonderful expressions, and she also has so many different looks over the years. And this is probably about 10 years ago or so also. And I think that one was also from Detroit when she was in her
Yeah, it
shaved
says
head.
Detroit 2009.
Okay, that's one of my first times in Detroit then, yeah. Yeah, the older camera didn't do so bad. Frank Morgan actually began and ended and had the beginning and end of his life here in the Twin Cities. So when he was in quasi-retirement here, he played at the Jazz Festival a couple times. And I always found him a pretty photogenic guy, and liked him against this background outdoors. His clean white suit. And this was
Speaking
Detroit
about-
back
Yeah,
when
sorry.
the Alice Coltrane salute.
Is that Brandy Younger?
Yep. And nobody knew who she was then. It's like, who is that woman on harp? And it was like, and of course she's coming here. It'll be her first time here in another month or so. But I just liked capturing her that close with the harp. I always have fun photographing her, and it was really hard to pick out which photo I wanted to put into this bunch, Renee Marie, because she's so expressive and she has so much fun. And this was the Iowa City Jazz Festival, so at a time of day when the light was pretty good, and she was just having a great time interacting with the audience, and I was able to be fairly close.
You seem very close on all these people, on all.
Well, at the Iowa City Festival, I can get close because I'm their photographer, and they always leave space in front of the stage. And I'm not fighting with a bunch of photographers like in Detroit, and I am using the longer lens most of the time. Actually, unless I'm getting a large ensemble shot, I use that 7200 more. If I could only take one lens to the festival, I'd take that one.
So she's not talking directly to you in this photo?
No. She's talking to
Audience.
the audience. Yeah. No, she's not talking to me. I mean, not that I know of. So I wasn't really right on top of her. This is from a month ago. This is an example of why I will go to black and white. This is Lakeisha Benjamin with Phoenix, and that's E.J. Strickland in the background. And so I'm in
Great
front of the
photos.
stage, but they had the most horrible colored lighting for this set, and it kept changing and it kept flashing. It was like a light show. And so I said, well, I'm going to do all these in black and white when I get home. And but it was quite dark around her because it was like, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. And she did a magnificent show. She's quite a showman as well as an amazing musician. So she was prancing around a lot with that saxophone, but the light just caught her the right way when I got rid of the fact that it was horribly red.
Fantastic light.
Excuse me?
I said fantastic light. I like
Oh.
the angle of the light. Mhm.
Yeah. But on this particular set,
The composition and it.
and it's squared. I obviously have cropped some things out of that.
Doesn't matter. May I ask a technical question?
Yeah,
White
I
balance.
even have an answer.
Okay. Okay, thanks. White balance. How do you manage that?
I manage it
White
after the
balance.
fact. I have it on average white balance all the time, and I fix it later, which may not be the best thing, but in
Okay.
shows like that, you'd be constantly resetting your white balance.
Yeah.
And I'm going, I'm not going to do that. I'll fix it later. And if I can't get it really good, I'll go to black and white. So that's another reason why some of mine are black and white, because I couldn't get the white balance to work. There's a club. There's a club here that they've gotten better lately, but I always knew when I would shoot there, I'm going to put them in black and white because they would have horribly saturated blue, purple, and red light all the time. And I'm going, there's no correction for this.
I actually was going to ask you, since bringing up jazz clubs, what are some of your tips for shooting in like low light, kind of intimate settings, like jazz clubs or like just stages, sometimes even in dive bars?
Dive bars I don't have experience with that I can think of. Jazz clubs, some of them tend to use more light as a rule than others. And also a lot of them will cater to what the musician wants. I shoot at the Dakota Jazz Club downtown Minneapolis a lot, and usually the light there is really nice. But once in a while they have a musician or a band that says, we really want almost no light. There's been 1 or 2 times I've said, I just can't shoot in here because there's not enough light. I can't even see what's going on. That's when I like being able to bump up the ISO, and sometimes I'll bump it up really high, and I'll probably then put those shots in black and white, because at least the grain looks better in black and white than it does in color. And sometimes it's just really difficult. A lot of the places I shoot at, it isn't, because they tend to use fairly good light on the stage. I tend to be fairly close, and I'll do the color correction in photo processing later. But there are, I would guess some bars I've been in that sometimes you just don't shoot or you give up. I don't know. We have a new place off downtown called the Berlin, which is a wonderful club, but boy, do they have almost no light. And the light that they have is horribly saturated blue usually. And I just haven't been bothering bringing my camera in there. I mean, that's one, again, a nice thing about it. I'm not doing it for a living. I can say, no, I'm not doing it.
Did you ever carry your own lights?
No, I've never been a light person. No, I've never dealt with artificial lights, to tell you the truth. So, again, if you're not doing it for a living, you have a lot more latitude of what not to do.
Yeah.
And flash, please.
Well, you can't usually, or you shouldn't, even if they let you, use flash in an indoor club setting. I mean, that's just horrible. They always tell people to turn their flashes off, and there's always somebody that doesn't know how with their cell phone and they don't turn it off. So I never use flash indoors, and I've not really dealt with it outdoors either. So the answer is no, I don't use flash. At parties I'm shooting inside, you know, a wedding reception, or on occasion I will do that or something. No, I don't. So.
I would say here that Mark Pokempner, who is we've had on another session of Seeing Jazz, had developed some very good techniques for bouncing flash off of ceilings and walls.
Yeah.
So the flash was not in the face of the musicians and wasn't even really noticed by the audience. And he, you know, very fast flashes, but I think it's a advanced technique. And
It depends on your ceiling too. A lot of these places have very dark ceilings, and I'm not sure that you can bounce a light off them. But the Dakota wouldn't let you do that, for instance. No, they wouldn't care whether it was bouncing or not. They'd say nope. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, well, no, I mean,
If you're doing a photo shoot, like somebody is hiring you to do a photo shoot for their album or something, that's a whole different story with light setup than live performance.
well, I'm sure Mark was here to talk about how he spent time getting to know the club owners and, you know, making everybody comfortable with him.
I know the club owner real well, the Dakota. He's not gonna let me do it, or Mark either. But also it's a dark ceiling. It's a very high ceiling, a very dark one. I don't think he'd want to bounce it off anyway.
Right.
I don't think it'd work. But
Okay.
So this is a good moment.
If you want, we can go to the shots in clubs.
sure. Then we can get at what kind of light I am working with in those
Yeah.
situations. Yeah. Or the situations I go into. I'm not getting into situations that I know I can't work in. So. There we go. So that's the lighting I often get at the Dakota. It's Christian Sands just earlier this year. And usually the light on the piano is pretty good. I don't remember where I shot this, but it's in
It says
Twin Cities.
KJ's.
KJ's is what used to be the Artist Quarter became KJ's and is now closed. But I've always liked that lighting in the last 7 or 8 years anyway. It used to be really dark in there. But the lighting has improved a lot. This is Dean McGraw, who's one of our illustrious guitarist and also one of the most fun guys to shoot because he wears cool clothes and he has the best expressions while he's playing. And I've always loved shooting Dean. So this is the natural light of the club. And I believe this was taken at Jazz Central, which is a little small basement club in the Twin Cities. Dave Hagedorn is a fabulous vibes player. I've always loved shooting him because I find it very challenging to catch vibes. Because of all the motion involved.
Have you ever done double exposures?
Yeah, but I usually do them post, not at the time.
Post, okay.
Yeah, I've done them. I find I'm not that good at putting those together with people shots. I do a lot of double and triple imaging with non-people shots. But I think this was, he before he retired, he taught at St. Olaf College, and I believe they used this photo on the cover of their magazine when they did a story on him not too long ago. This is shot at the Dakota, and with the 7200, and Stanley Jordan was relatively close to the front of the stage, and so was I. And he's also one of my favorites to photograph because he's so expressive in so many ways.
I like the strings at the head of the guitar.
And he always wears something fun. And Craig Taborn doesn't come to town too much. I don't get too many chances to photograph him. He was here. I think this was not with his band, but it might have been. He's been here in several configurations. And a club is hard to shoot.
It says it's the Ice House.
Ice House, yep. Ice House is where they often have incredibly badly saturated light. This was actually fixed as much as I could fix it and fixed better than a lot of them. So that's why I left it in color, because I kind of like that background orangey thing there.
Has he seen this photo?
Yeah, I'm sure he has. His mother's a good friend of mine. She lives here. He grew up here.
Right. Very handsome.
This was also, I believe, at the Ice House. Dan Weiss, who is fun. He's fun and can often catch his drumsticks doing something weird or fun. Anyway, but I usually process in black and white from the Ice House. And I don't usually process in black and white from the Dakota, but I had to for this one. It just felt like the lighting was such that it needed to be in black and white. Roy Hargrove's last time he played there in 2018, I think, right before he died.
Oh, wow.
And those dots in that upper corner were from string lights they have up on the mezzanine. So, and Hiromi, I mean, everybody loves shooting Hiromi because she's so photogenic and she's so energetic, and every time you see her, her hair's different and she's just a lot of fun. So,
I like the movement of the back.
This is oddly specific,
she's
but
full of
any
movement.
tips for, sorry.
So she's full of movement.
Yes, I know, but mostly people tend to catch that extreme movement. Okay, but this is the Hiromi I like.
Shauna, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I mean, oddly specific, but is there any tips for catching, especially like hands moving on keys because that's such rapid movement?
High shutter speed, as high as you can go. But you also maybe don't want you don't want to stop it totally. You want to make it look like it is movement. So some of that's a little experimenting. Having a good view. I think it's a matter of timing, and I think the more you do it, the better you can time it. Part of that's an experience thing. And experimenting with your combination of your shutter speeds and your apertures to see what can I get away with in this light, what will work without your
I don't usually I don't shoot much, music. I usually do street photography or studio photography. But when I've gone to dark club, especially the two that Mike Reed owns that Howard mentioned, my wife got me a small tripod. So I put it on the table, and I feel like it allows me to not lower the speed a little bit more.
It would, I mean, it would, and of course it does. The problem with jazz clubs, well, and festivals would be worse. Jazz clubs is, it depends where you're sitting, if that's going to help you any. Because if you have to lean out of your seat to get the angle you want, the tripod isn't going to do any good. So, and to me, it's one more thing to lug in. In the Dakota, I usually have enough light that I can shoot and hand hold what I'm shooting.
Yeah.
Some places that wouldn't be true.
And how do you choose the moment or movement or for each of the performers? I mean, do you shoot many pictures and then choose the one that you
if there's a lot of movement,
or
I'll
you're
shoot a number of them, because you can't say which is the right second to, you have to shoot a number in a row. Not so much if you're shooting a scene like this where they're not moving around and the movement isn't really what you're going for anyway. So you can usually just zero in on one shot. But it's the other reason I like the mirrorless is it doesn't make the noise that the bigger SLRs made, and where you would drive everybody nuts in a jazz club if you rattled off 20 shots. They'd think you were shooting machine gun. So it's been nice to not have somebody saying, I can hear that next to you. With the mirrorless, you basically can't unless you're really trying to hear it. But yeah, so that those shots of Hiromi, I probably took 20 shots in a row really quickly to get that. And sometimes I'll end up with 20 that are okay, and sometimes I'll end up with 1 or even 0. So. Anyway, that was just an example of an ensemble shot in an indoor setting. In this venue, I can do some walking around without disturbing people, because you can go out and there's a barrier that you can walk behind and come around to some of the corners of the club that don't have table sitting in them. Other places, you're pretty much stuck staying put.
Nice how they're all in their own moment there.
She's fun to photograph because usually I get her in because she moves so much, but there was just a couple times when she was just obviously really enjoying what was going on with the music, and even though she wasn't blowing her clarinet at the moment. I thought that's musical satisfaction for you. Plus she's photogenic, so it doesn't hurt. And I did have a few chances to see Korea at the Dakota in particular, and with a relatively good seat to catch those hands in motion. So that was probably one of the last times he came there. I have so many pictures of the Bad Plus, but this is one of my favorites because there's a bit of the crowd in it.
Yeah.
And it was fairly dark because this is a fairly grainy photo. Take a look at it.
But the grain is working well for it.
And that's another reason why I put it in black and white. In black and white, you can get away with grain and it looks artsy. And put it in color, it looks like you just didn't quite get it. So I like this guy in the audience up front was just really intent with his, listening to what's going on. Of course, this is the old Bad Plus, Ethan.
Yeah.
The original.
The original Bad Plus, yeah, the baddest Bad Plus, I don't know. I just love the fact that they were both on top of each other here. The Lovano Schofield Quartet came to the Dakota. And they were having a lot of fun. So was I. One of my favorite subjects of all jazz musicians is Billy Peterson. He's based here, although he's almost never here because he's always touring in Europe with somebody. But he just has the most photogenic face, and I've just followed him for years. And I like to put it in black and white because it shows all those lines and it's concentration. And I don't remember. Was that taken at Crooners? I don't know. I don't remember how.
No, it says Jazz Central 2015.
Oh, Jazz Central? Really? Oh, he hardly ever plays there. Okay. And
This is at
Bill
Crooners.
Carruthers, I mean, concentration there. He's always fun because he has the greatest set of facial expressions. So I love photographing him too. Regina Carter, I think one of her last times here at the Dakota. And I kind of like the fact that on that one that I got Chris Lightcap in the background, even though he wasn't sharp. I thought that just added something I liked
to the dynamism.
Yeah, I like
it's more dynamic that way.
Yeah, I like it better than the ones of just her alone.
Yeah,
I love her concentration. Lynn Ariel has asked me to photograph her several times. So this was a stage shot after a show, and she's actually used this one a bunch. I think she's very photogenic. She hates most of everything she sees, but a lot of people are like that. I like the way we use the piano to frame it.
When you use the term photogenic, Andrea, I mean, it's like all these faces are looking beautiful in your photographs.
It's probably a wrong word for me to use. Easy to photograph, maybe. I think some faces are much easier to get a good image of than others. And a lot of times it probably has nothing to do with the person, it has to do with the light around them. Like I think the light really helps make this shot in this place. But we were able to fool around with the light here. We didn't have to depend on what was naturally there.
Did you touch up
I think the expressions,
Okay, which question?
Did you touch up the color? Howard was asking.
No.
I said the facial expressions make a big difference, in my opinion, because when one of the first times I took a camera to a jazz club, and I've been going to live jazz for decades, I took a photograph of a drummer here, a local drummer, and it came out very good, and I sent it to him asking him permission to submit it to he said, well, my tongue is out.
Oh.
I said, oh, I'm so sorry, I won't use it. And then I went to another of his shows like 6 months later, and his tongue was out the entire time.
Because that's what he does. Yeah.
That's how he plays.
Yeah, I know. And they don't always like to be reminded that's how they play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had, well, I know Lynn is going to bug me if I post something that she hasn't said it was okay. I know most of the musicians I know, they're fine, but there are a few that you better run it by them or they're going to say, no, take that down.
Yeah.
This was the first time I'd seen Esperanza. So this is, I think, 2009 or 10 at the Dakota.
Yeah.
And I just really loved how this came out with the light. And I don't know if it's still there, but for a while, a print of this was hanging in her manager's office because they liked the photo. Very different, I think, than the way she looks now. But because it really looks like a posed portrait, and it wasn't. She was just in the zone at the right moment. Abdullah Ibrahim. I think this is the one I sent in for the JJA, the book that's coming out.
That's right. This is the first image in the book.
Oh, really?
Which I now have bound copy of, bound proofs of. And we've worked very hard to, because of the darkness, and not just your photo, Andrea, but a lot of the photographers who submitted works had very black photos.
Yeah.
And because it's a print on demand situation, the books get printed by different printers all around the world. So it's difficult to, I gather, to prepare the file such that it just won't become completely ink. And so our designer, Sylvia Martinez, she's done a really good job, and I think you can be pleased
Okay,
by the
good.
way
Thanks.
this
Sorry about that.
No, it's
Yeah, no.
it was a production issue,
Yeah.
but we're glad that it's a challenge, and I think she's surmounted it. And it's a great opening image for the book, and I'm really proud of the book. So
Can't wait to see it.
we're looking at an October 1st publication date, and the promotions are going to start probably in 2 weeks.
Cool. Well, this was Abdullah Ibrahim's first visit to the I think it was during his first tour of the United States, actually, but it was his first time I saw him at the Dakota. And this was at the end of the show. I had a lot of photos of him playing, but I just loved that look and his hands, and transferring it to black and white was fairly easy in this case. And it needed to be in black and white, was my feeling, because of just the shadows really made it. So.
Yeah, it's nice.
Well, and she's always, you never know what she's going to be wearing, what glasses she's going to be wearing, Cecile. And she's another one of my favorites to photograph, because she's just so expressive. And I think her white glasses are my favorites of her costume so far, and especially putting it in black and white when they really stood out. Anyway, this is at the Dakota. She comes almost every year.
And I think that's the end of the the club shot.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. This has been very, very informative.
Okay.
I think that we'll wrap up. Shauna has had to leave anyway, so thank you for being with us. And again, this is Seeing Jazz, featuring the work of Andrea Canter from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I'm Hrayr Attarian, the host of the program. And we'll see you all next month.
Thanks for having me.
See you.